There are places in England where history doesn't fade, it waits. And among them one stands silent still, Blackthorn Manor, nestled in the damp hollows of Hampshire, where the mist clings to the hedgerows long after dawn, and the ivy has long since swallowed the gateposts whole. In the winter of 1873, the house belonged to Dr. Eleanor Lyle, a man of considerable repute in the surgical circles of London, though he had retired early to this secluded estate, citing nerves and the weight of blood on the hands. His wife, Eleanor Lyle, née Ashworth, was known to the villagers as a woman of quiet grace, her voice low, her eyes always slightly averted, as though she bore witness to something just beyond the veil of ordinary sight. She kept no servants beyond a single maid who came twice weekly, and she rarely attended church, though she was often seen walking the perimeter of the manor's overgrown gardens at twilight, her gloved hands clasped tightly before her, as if in prayer or restraint. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Dr. Lyle's experiments, conducted in the converted East Wing, once a music room, were the subject of local curiosity, but not suspicion. He spoke of advancing anatomical understanding, of perfecting preservation, and indeed the scent of formaldehyde and camphor drifted from the manor windows even on still days. Yet villagers began to whisper of other things, how the doctor's carriage would arrive at odd hours with no passenger visible within, how the local undertaker, Mr. Hampshire, grew increasingly reluctant to speak of the bodies he delivered to the estate, how Mrs. Lyle, once so pale and composed, began to wear darker shawls, as though trying to hide not her body, but her shadow. Then came the letters, discovered decades later in a rusted strongbox beneath the floorboards of the abandoned post office in nearby Weybourne. They were addressed to Eleanor from various provincial medical colleges, written in the clipped clinical prose of administrators, thanking her for specimens of exceptional quality and inquiring discreetly about future deliveries. One, dated October 1874, noted with peculiar emphasis, the thoracic cavity remains intact, though the hands show signs of recent articulation. We commend your husband's precision, but Dr. Lyle, by all surviving accounts, never left his study after 1872. His hands, according to his final physician, trembled too violently for surgery. It was Eleanor who managed the correspondence, who met the couriers at the back gate under cover of fog, who signed the ledgers with her husband's name in a hand so practiced it fooled even the Royal College's clerks. And yet the specimens kept coming, dozens of them, each more meticulously prepared than the last. How the question gnawed at those few who knew enough to ask. The village constable, Thomas Greaves, recorded in his private journal that he once glimpsed Mrs. Lyle dragging a linen-wrapped bundle across the dew-slicked lawn toward the east wing, her nightgown stained dark at the hem. He claimed he heard no sound from the bundle, only a faint, rhythmic clicking, like bone against bone. The descent into the truth began not with accusation, but with absence. In the spring of 1875, both Lyles vanished from public view. No more carriage rides, no more letters, no more twilight walks. The manor's windows grew opaque with dust. When the vicar finally summoned the courage to knock, the door swung open on rusted hinges to reveal a house frozen in time, teacups half full, a shawl draped over a chair, a ledger open on the desk with the final entry reading simply, "Paid in full," but the east wing was locked. And though the vicar swore he heard a low hum emanating from behind the door, like a tuning fork struck in an empty room, he dared not force it. The matter was quietly closed. The estate passed to a distant cousin who never visited, and Blackthorn Manor sank into the earth like a stone in a pond. It was not until 1911 that the story stirred again, when a young historian named Edmund Vail, researching the ethics of Victorian anatomical trade, stumbled upon a reference to Mrs. Lyle's consignments in the archives of Guy's Hospital. Intrigued, he travelled to Hampshire, where elderly villagers still crossed themselves at the mention of the manor. Vail spent months poring over parish records, coroner's reports, and the brittle pages of Eleanor's recovered diary, found tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of Gray's Anatomy in a second-hand bookshop in Winchester. Her entries grew increasingly fragmented. "He says they consented in spirit," she wrote in January 1875, "but I hear them weep in the walls." Another, "The glass eyes watch me from the shelves. I have begun to answer them." Vale became obsessed. He petitioned the courts to exhume the manor's garden, convinced bodies were buried there. None were found, but beneath the floor of the east wing, now collapsed from rot, he uncovered a hidden chamber lined with glass jars, each containing not organs, but articulated hands, posed as if in mid-gesture, one clutching a pen, another cradling a teacup, a third reaching outward, fingers splayed in silent plea. Vale's notes, preserved in the British Library's restricted collection, suggest a theory too disturbing for publication, that Eleanor Lyle, unable to procure cadavers through legal means, had begun to prepare the living, patients her husband had deemed beyond cure, vagrants who wandered too close to the estate, perhaps even the maid who stopped coming. But the hands in the jars bore no signs of violence. Instead, they showed evidence of careful, almost reverent dissection, muscles preserved in lifelike tension, tendons threaded with silk. And in the center of the chamber, Vale found a small music box, its mechanism rusted shut. When he pried it open, he discovered not a cylinder but a human finger bone, carved with minute notches. Later analysis suggested it had once played a lullaby, a tune villagers recalled humming to their children, though none could remember learning it. The revelation, if it can be called that, lies not in what was done, but in what was believed. Eleanor Lyle did not merely sell bodies. She believed she was granting them purpose beyond death, weaving them into a grand, silent symphony of utility. Her husband's name was the shield, but her will was the scalpel. And in the end, she may have joined them, not as victim, but as final offering. For when Vale returned to the manor one last time in 1912, he claimed the east wing door, long sealed, stood ajar. Inside, the air was cold and still. On the central table lay a woman's glove, empty, perfectly shaped to a hand that was no longer there. And from somewhere deep within the walls, beyond brick, beyond bone, came the faintest echo of a melody, played on no instrument known to man. Today, Blackthorn Manor is little more than a ruin, its stones reclaimed by bramble and rain. Yet on certain nights, when the wind blows from the east, locals say you can hear it. Not a scream, not a sob, but the soft, precise click of fingers against glass, as if someone or something is still arranging the pieces, still waiting for the next delivery. There are those who insist the story ends with Eleanor's disappearance, that the silence which followed was merely the closing of a grim chapter in a forgotten corner of England. But history, when listened to closely, rarely concludes, it echoes. And in the decades after Vale's investigations, whispers persisted, not of ghosts, but of continuance. Letters surfaced in unexpected places, a solicitor's office in Bath, a medical museum in Edinburgh, even tucked inside the binding of a donated Bible at a parish library in Dorset. Each bore the same elegant script, the ink faded but legible, the phrasing courteous, precise, and chillingly routine. Enclosed, please find the requested specimens, one read, dated 1881, 6 years after Eleanor was last seen. Another, from 1889, noted, the left ocular globe remains intact. Preservation fluid adjusted per your suggestion. The handwriting matched Eleanor's without doubt. Confirmed by graphologists in the 1920s, though the paper bore no postmark, no return address, only the faint watermark of a crow in flight, a symbol never used by any known stationer of the era. Vale, now a broken man, spent his final years attempting to trace these missives. He interviewed retired postmasters, cross-referenced shipping logs, even consulted spiritualists, though he claimed never to have believed in their theatrics, only in the possibility that someone, somewhere, was mimicking Eleanor's hand with uncanny fidelity. Yet no forger was ever found. The parcels, when they arrived, contained exactly what they promised: anatomical preparations of astonishing quality, far exceeding the techniques of the time. One specimen, a larynx preserved with its vocal cords taut as violin strings, was said to emit a low hum when exposed to moonlight, a phenomenon documented by a skeptical professor at King's College, who later refused to speak of it again. Vale's private journals grow increasingly fragmented during this period. He writes of dreams in which he walks the corridors of Blackthorn Manor, not as it was, but as it might have become: walls lined with glass cabinets holding not organs, but entire figures, seated at tables, posed reading books, one even knitting with bone needles. "They do not move," he wrote in 1914, "but they are waiting, and she is among them not as mistress, but as one of the arranged." What makes the case so unnerving is not its extremity, but its plausibility within the moral fog of the age. The trade in unclaimed bodies was rampant. The poor law ensured a steady supply of the destitute dead, and surgeons often turned a blind eye to the origins of their cadavers. But Eleanor Lyle operated outside even those shadowed channels. She did not steal corpses, she curated them. Her ledgers, recovered from a false drawer in Dr. Lyle's desk, list not names, but qualities: excellent musculature, male, approx. 30, or fine facial structure, female, post-febrile. Payments were made not in coin, but in rare chemicals, anatomical texts, and once, curiously, a child's porcelain music box. It was as though she were assembling a silent congregation, each member chosen for a role in a liturgy only she understood. And Dr. Lyle? His own diaries, sparse and clinical, betray a growing detachment. "Eleanor manages the practicalities," he wrote in 1873. "I am content to observe." By 1874, his entries cease entirely after Vale's death in 1918, officially from pneumonia. Though his housekeeper claimed he froze from the inside out, the case might have faded into obscurity had it not been for the discovery in 1936 of a sealed crate in the basement of the Royal College of Surgeons. Misfiled for over 60 years, it bore no sender. Only the initials EL and the word final inside were 12 glass jars, each containing a human ear, perfectly preserved, oriented as if still listening. Tucked beneath them was a single sheet of paper on which was written, "They hear you still." The crate was quietly destroyed, but not before a junior archivist made a rubbing of the label. That rubbing now resides in a locked drawer at the Wellcome Library, its edges brittle, its message unexplained. To this day, no body, neither Eleanor's nor her husband's, has ever been found. The manor's well was drained in 1922. It contained only silt and the rusted hinge of a music box. The garden was excavated again in 1951 during a land survey. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies beneath the east wing, but the landowner refused further digging, citing family sensitivities. And yet, the sense of presence lingers. In the 1970s, a group of university students broke into the ruins on a dare. They reported nothing unusual, no apparitions, no cold spots, only an overwhelming certainty that they were being watched from the empty window frames. One girl, however, returned home with a strange affliction. She could no longer hear her own voice. Doctors found nothing wrong with her ears. She simply existed in a bubble of silence, as if her sound had been collected. Perhaps the true horror lies not in what Eleanor did, but in what she believed she was doing. Not profaning the dead, but perfecting them. In her mind, the body was not a temple nor a vessel, but an instrument, one that could be tuned, arranged, and played long after the soul had fled. And if the soul lingered, then it too could be harmonized. This was not madness in the vulgar sense, but a terrible clarity, a vision so absolute it bent reality around it. The villagers, in their blunt wisdom, understood this better than the scholars. They never called Blackthorn haunted. They called it listened to. Now the manor stands roofless, its chimneys like broken fingers against the sky. Ivy drapes the shattered windows, and rain pools in the hollows where floorboards once creaked under careful footsteps. But on still nights, when the moon glints off the remaining shards of glass in the east wing, those who pass too close swear they hear it. Not a voice, not a cry, but the soft, deliberate turning of a page in a ledger that was never closed. And sometimes, just before dawn, a single note rises from the ruins, clear, sustained, and achingly human, as if a throat long silenced has found, for one breath, its voice again. The persistence of the phenomenon defies rational containment. Even as the 20th century advanced with its electric lights and motor cars, the legend of Blackthorn Manor refused to be relegated to the cobwebbed corners of folklore. Instead, it seeped into the margins of official record, quietly, insistently, like ink bleeding through paper. In 1947, during the reorganization of wartime medical archives, a clerk at St. Bartholomew's uncovered a requisition form dated 1876, stamped with the seal of the Royal College, requesting 3 complete nervous systems, preferably from subjects exhibiting melancholic temperament. The supplier field bore only the initials EL and a notation in pencil. Delivered in person. Payment waived. The form should not have existed. By then, the Anatomy Act had long regulated cadaver sourcing, and private transactions of this nature were not only illegal, but logistically impossible. Yet the document passed every test of authenticity, paper composition, ink chemistry, even the wax residue from the seal-matched period standards. It was filed away with a red tag marked anomalous and never spoken of again. What lends the case its peculiar gravity is not the macabre nature of the trade, but the uncanny precision with which Eleanor Lyle seemed to anticipate the needs of her clients. Letters from provincial anatomy departments, many of which had no formal connection to the Lyles, reveal unsolicited deliveries arriving precisely when stocks ran low, as though she watched from a distance, tallying deficits in her mind. A professor at Aberdeen recalled in his memoirs receiving a crate in 1883 containing a perfectly dissected brachial plexus, accompanied by a note. "You mentioned the difficulty in your lecture of 79. I trust this resolves it." He had, indeed, given such a lecture, but to a closed audience of 12, none of whom admitted to correspondence with anyone named Lyle. The implication that Eleanor possessed knowledge she could not possibly have obtained unsettled even the most hardened empiricists. Some speculated she employed spies, others whispered of clairvoyance. But the truth, if there is one, may be simpler and far stranger, that she did not gather information so much as respond to a silent summons, as a musician answers a note only she can hear. This notion finds eerie corroboration in the few personal effects recovered from the manor after its final abandonment. Among them was a small writing desk, its surface scarred with chemical burns, inside which lay a bundle of dried lavender tied with black thread and a notebook filled not with words, but with musical notation. At first glance, it appeared to be a collection of folk tunes, yet upon closer inspection, the staves contained no conventional melodies. Instead, the notes corresponded to anatomical terms: C for cranium, G for gluteus, F for femur, arranged in sequences that, when hummed, produced a dissonant harmony said to induce dizziness in listeners. A musicologist consulted in the 1950s refused to transcribe it further, claiming the intervals violated natural resonance. More disturbing still was the discovery, tucked between the pages, of a lock of hair, fine, silver white, and coiled like a spring, bound to a slip of paper reading, "For the final arrangement." It was this phrase that haunted Edmund Vale in his last years. He became convinced that Eleanor had not merely prepared specimens, but composed them, structuring the manor itself as a vast, silent instrument in which each preserved part played a role in a greater, inaudible symphony. His notes grow increasingly abstract. "The house is not a container, but a score," he wrote. "The jars are clefs, the hands are rests, and she..." She is both composer and final note. In 1916, he returned to Blackthorn with a phonograph, hoping to capture the rumored hum. He recorded nothing but wind, yet when the wax cylinder was played back in London, a faint rhythmic tapping could be heard beneath the static, matching the cadence of a human pulse. The cylinder vanished from the lab within a week. Vale never mentioned it again. After his death, his protégée, Dr. Miriam Croft, a rare female anatomist of her time, continued the work in secret. Unlike Vale, she approached the matter not as a historian, but as a scientist of thresholds, where physiology ends and something else begins. She tracked down every known recipient of Lyle's specimens, visiting museums, private collections, even the locked cabinets of retired surgeons. In most cases, the items had disappeared, sometimes decades prior, sometimes mere weeks after her inquiry. One collector in Glasgow confessed that his jar containing a preserved tongue had emptied itself overnight, leaving only fluid and a faint scent of lavender. Another in Bristol claimed his cabinet of hands had rearranged their poses each morning, always forming the same gesture. Palm outward, fingers slightly curled, as if warding off or welcoming something unseen. Dr. Croft's final report, never published, concluded with a hypothesis too radical for her peers, that Eleanor Lyle had not died, but transmuted, not in the mystical sense, but in the anatomical one, dissolving her own boundaries until she became indistinguishable from the collection she curated. She did not vanish into the walls, Croft wrote. She became the walls. This idea finds a grim echo in the manor's physical decay. Unlike other ruins of similar age, Blackthorn exhibits no signs of rodent infestation, no bird nests in its eaves, no ivy penetrating its inner chambers, only a pervasive stillness, as though the very air refuses to stir. Soil samples taken in the 1960s revealed unusually high concentrations of formaldehyde and traces of human collagen deep in the foundation, suggesting that the building itself had been treated, or perhaps fed, with organic preservatives over many years. Even now, the manor exerts a quiet magnetism. In 1983, a television crew filming a documentary on Victorian medicine set up equipment in the grounds. Their audio engineer reported capturing a voice on the backup recorder, a woman's voice, calm and measured, reciting what sounded like an inventory: left tibia, intact, right humerus, slight calcification, larynx functional. When played back, the tape contained only static. Yet 3 members of the crew later described dreaming of a woman in a high-collared dress standing at the edge of their vision, holding a ledger that never stopped writing itself. And returned, the final, most unsettling thread emerged in 2001, when a digitization project at the British Medical Archives uncovered a series of microfilm reels mislabeled as dental records. Among them was a single frame showing a photograph. Impossible, given the era of a dimly lit room lined with glass cases. In the foreground, a figure in a black gown stands with her back turned, one hand resting on a jar. The image is blurred, as though the subject moved during exposure. But the reflection in the glass behind her shows not a face, but a mosaic of eyes, mouths and hands, all watching the camera. The reel was deaccessioned the following day. No copy remains. Yet those who saw it swear they recognized the pattern of the wallpaper. It matched the east wing of Blackthorn, down to the water stain shaped like a crow in flight. Today, the site is fenced off, not by government order, but by local consensus. No sign warns visitors away. None is needed. Children avoid it. Dogs whine when led too near. And on certain evenings, when the fog rolls in from the downs, the villagers say you can hear it, not a scream, not a plea, but the soft, steady scratch of a pen on paper, as if someone is still making entries, still balancing accounts, still waiting for the next body to arrive, so the arrangement may continue. For in the end, Eleanor Lyle did not sell the dead. She gave them purpose. And perhaps in that silent exchange, she found her own. The silence of Blackthorn Manor has never been absolute. Even in its ruin it speaks, not in words but in absences that carve themselves into memory. Those who have lingered too long near its crumbling threshold often report a peculiar sensation, not fear precisely, but the uncanny certainty that they have been misfiled. That somewhere in a ledger bound in human skin or etched onto bone, their name appears under pending. This feeling is rarely articulated. It lingers as a tremor in the hands, a reluctance to look in mirrors at night, a sudden aversion to the scent of lavender. It is as though the manor does not haunt, but catalogues, and once noted, one cannot be unnoted. This notion finds strange validation in the scattered testimonies of those who inherited Lyle's specimens, however indirectly. In 1923, a retired pathologist in Leeds bequeathed his private collection to the university, stipulating that the Lyle donation remains sealed until 1950. When the crate was finally opened, it contained nothing but 12 empty jars and a single sheet of paper bearing the words, "Returned for adjustment." The university dismissed it as a prank until 3 staff members fell ill within the week, each complaining of a persistent ringing in their left ear, localized to the exact frequency of middle C. All recovered, but none could bear the sound of tuning forks thereafter. Similarly, in 1967, an antique dealer in York auctioned a Victorian writing desk said to have belonged to a surgeon's wife. The buyer, a collector of medical ephemera, reported that every letter he penned at the desk arrived at its destination already written, in a hand, not his own, detailing ailments he did not possess. He burned the desk within a month. Ash analysis later revealed traces of calcium phosphate, consistent with ground bone. What distinguishes Eleanor Lyle's legacy from mere superstition is its bureaucratic texture. Her influence manifests not as spectres or shrieks, but as paperwork that should not exist, deliveries with no sender, debts settled in currencies no bank recognizes. In 1978, during an audit of the Royal College's historical accounts, an accountant discovered a recurring entry from 1875 to 1892, payment to EL Preservation Services. The amounts were modest, paid quarterly, always in silver coin. The final entry, dated December 1892, read, "Balance cleared, subject integrated." No explanation accompanied it. When questioned, elderly clerks recalled nothing but one, on his deathbed in 1981, muttered to his nurse about the woman who paid in silence, and how her invoices always arrived. Folded inside dried flowers, this administrative haunting suggests a mind that did not merely cross ethical boundaries, but redefined them as thresholds of service. Eleanor saw herself not as a trafficker, but as a facilitator, a conduit between the departed and the disciplines that sought to understand them. And if the departed resisted, then resistance too could be preserved, studied, harmonized. Her diaries, in their later pages, betray a shift from clinical detachment to something akin to devotion. "They do not wish to be forgotten," she wrote in 1874, "only to be useful." Another entry, nearly illegible, "I hear their gratitude in the hum of the jars. It is the purest music." It is this conviction that utility is a form of love that renders her actions so unnerving. She did not desecrate the dead. She consecrated them to purpose, and in doing so consecrated herself. The descent into myth was inevitable, yet it followed a peculiar trajectory. Unlike other Victorian horrors, the axe-wielding madman, the poisoner in lace, Eleanor Lyle inspired not revulsion, but a kind of reluctant reverence. Local midwives in the early 1900s would whisper her name when a difficult birth stalled, as though invoking a patron saint of last resort. Gravestones in the Weybourne churchyard from the 1880s occasionally bear the initials EL carved faintly beneath the deceased's name, though no record exists of her involvement. Even today, elderly residents speak of leaving small offerings, a sprig of lavender, a blank page at the edge of the manor grounds when a loved one passes, so she'll know they're accounted for. It is not worship exactly. It is acknowledgement. Modern science, for all its skepticism, cannot entirely dismiss the anomalies. In 2009, a team from the University of Southampton conducted a spectral analysis of the East Wing's remaining walls using non-invasive resonance imaging. They detected faint harmonic vibrations emanating from within the plaster, frequencies that matched no known natural source, but aligned precisely with the tuning of a human vocal tract producing the vowel ah. More curiously, the vibrations intensified when researchers spoke anatomical terms aloud. Femur elicited a low thrum, occipital a higher chime. When asked to comment, the lead physicist declined, noting only that some structures retain memory in ways we don't yet understand. The data was archived, labeled acoustic anomaly, Blackthorn site, and quietly removed from public access. Perhaps the most telling evidence lies not in what remains, but in what refuses to decay. In 1995, a storm uprooted an ancient yew at the manor's rear, exposing a shallow cavity beneath its roots. Inside lay a child's shoe, perfectly preserved despite over a century of burial, its leather supple, its laces still tied in a neat bow. Tucked in the toe was a slip of paper with a single word, ready. Forensic botanists confirmed the yew had been planted after 1870, likely by human hands. Yet no child is recorded as having died at Blackthorn during that era. Unless, of course, the child was never alive to begin with, merely assembled, like the rest, from spare parts and silent hope. Dr. Croft, in her unpublished addendum, speculated that Eleanor's work evolved beyond mere dissection into a form of post-mortem curation so advanced it bordered on resurrection, not of life, but of function. She did not bring back the soul, Croft wrote. She brought back the gesture, the sigh, the turn of the wrist, and in a world that had lost its manners, perhaps that was enough. This theory gains weight from the few intact specimens that survived. One, held in a private Swiss collection, is a pair of lungs mounted in a bell jar, said to expand slightly when exposed to whispered secrets. Another, reportedly destroyed in a fire in 1943, was a heart suspended in fluid that beat in time with nearby listeners' pulses, slowing when they calmed, racing when they feared. The ultimate revelation may be this: Eleanor Lyle did not disappear because she was caught or punished. She vanished because her work was complete. Not in the sense of conclusion, but of absorption. She became the archive. Every rustle in the manor's walls, every misplaced document, every phantom invoice is not a ghost story. It is a filing system. And the melody heard on still nights, not a lament, but a metronome, keeping time for an arrangement that continues even now. In the spaces between breaths, visitors who dare approach the ruins at dawn sometimes glimpse a figure in the upper window, pale, motionless, holding what might be a pen or a bone needle. But when they look again, the space is empty. Only the glass remains, fogged as if by recent breath. And if one listens very closely, just as the first light touches the broken eaves, there comes the softest sound, not of footsteps, not of weeping, but of a page being turned in a book that was never meant to end. The true measure of Eleanor Lyle's influence lies not in the relics she left behind, but in the silence she cultivated. A silence so profound it became a presence unto itself. Those who have studied the case in depth often speak not of fear, but of a peculiar form of reverence, as though they have stumbled upon a sacred archive whose rules they do not yet understand. In the 1930s, a young archivist named Arthur Pembroke, tasked with cataloguing the medical donations of a recently deceased surgeon, found among the papers a small envelope sealed with black wax. Inside was a single human fingernail, polished to a pearlescent sheen, and a note for the index. Handle with care. There was no name, no date, only the faint scent of camphor. Pembroke, a rational man by all accounts, placed the nail in a specimen box and filed it under unidentified donations. That night, He dreamt of standing in a vast library where the books had spines made of skin and the pages turned themselves in unison. Upon waking, he discovered the box open on his desk, the nail gone. He resigned the following week and never worked with historical documents again. This pattern repeats across decades. Objects vanish, records rewrite themselves, and those who investigate too closely find their own lives subtly rearranged. In 1954, a doctoral candidate at Oxford, writing a thesis on Victorian anatomical ethics, requested access to the Lyle correspondence held in restricted archives. She was granted permission, but upon reviewing the materials, she noted discrepancies. Letters she had read the day before now contained different phrases, different dates, as though the ink had shifted in the night. One passage, previously detailing a shipment of thoracic specimens, now read, "She walks among them still, and they know her voice." The student withdrew her thesis and emigrated to Canada. Decades later, in a letter to a former professor, she admitted she could no longer look at her own hands without wondering if they might one day be posed in silent service. What makes the phenomenon so resistant to dismissal is its adherence to form. Eleanor Lyle did not deal in chaos. She dealt in order. Every anomaly bears the stamp of meticulous intention. Even the music box fingerbone recovered by Vale was later found to correspond to a specific note in a forgotten lullaby. Titled The Sleeper's Reply, a melody once used in Hampshire nurseries to soothe children said to be listening to the dead. The tune, reconstructed from fragments in parish songbooks, contains an unusual interval, a diminished fifth that acousticians call the devil's interval for its dissonant, unsettling quality. When played on a glass harmonica, it produces vibrations that cause fine powders to arrange themselves into branching patterns resembling human nerve clusters. Whether Eleanor knew this, or whether she intuited it through some deeper attunement to the body's hidden harmonies, remains unknowable. But the implication is clear. Her work was not merely anatomical. It was acoustic. She did not just preserve form, she preserved resonance. This theory gained unexpected support in 1987 when a retired organ tuner named Harold Finch visited the manor out of historical curiosity. Though blind since childhood, Finch possessed an extraordinary sensitivity to spatial acoustics. He spent an afternoon in the East Wing, tapping walls, listening to echoes, humming test tones. Later, he told a local historian that the room was tuned, not to a musical key, but to a physiological one. It resonates at the frequency of a resting human heart, he said. But only if you stand where the table used to be. When pressed, he grew agitated. It's not haunted, he insisted. It's calibrated. He refused to return, and died 2 years later under unexplained circumstances, found seated at his workbench, hands folded neatly, a single dried lavender sprig in his breast pocket, the calibration extended beyond sound. In the 1960s, a botanist studying invasive species noted that the ivy-consuming Blackthorn Manor grew in a distinct spiral pattern, clockwise on the north face, counterclockwise on the south, defying all known phytotactic behavior. Soil samples revealed elevated levels of potassium and trace amounts of mercury, consistent with embalming fluids. More strangely, the roots, when sectioned, displayed cellular structures resembling neural tissue under magnification. The findings were dismissed as contamination, but the botanist kept a private journal in which he speculated that the manor was not being reclaimed by nature, but reinterpreted by it, as though the earth itself were attempting to transcribe Eleanor's work into botanical form. Even time seems malleable within the manor's sphere. Multiple witnesses across generations have reported losing hours while standing near the East Wing, emerging from a brief inspection to find the sun in a different quadrant. Their watches stopped, their memories of the interval blank. In 1921, a surveyor mapping the estate boundary noted in his log that his compass spun wildly near the ruins, not from magnetic interference, but as if pointing to something that isn't there. Decades later, satellite thermal imaging revealed a persistent cold spot over the same location, unmoved by season or weather, as though the air itself refused to warm where Eleanor once walked. Yet for all its strangeness, the legacy of Blackthorn is not one of malice. There are no tales of curses, no accounts of violent retribution. Instead, there is only the quiet insistence of continuity. In 2003, a young medical student volunteering at a London anatomy lab was assigned to clean a set of century-old demonstration models. Among them was a hand, wax-coated, articulated with fine wires, posed as if holding a teacup. On its inner wrist, nearly invisible, was a tiny tattoo, EL 1875. That night, the student dreamt of a woman in a high-collared dress offering her a ledger. "You may sign," the woman said, though her lips did not move. "Or you may be signed." The student woke with the taste of lavender on her tongue. She switched her major to literature the following semester. The final testament may come not from documents, but from absence. No photograph of Eleanor Lyle is known to exist. Portraits commissioned during her lifetime were either destroyed or returned to the artist with the face meticulously scraped away. Even Dr. Lyle's personal effects contain no image of his wife, only a locket found in his coat pocket after his disappearance, which held not a miniature, but a sliver of polished bone inscribed with the word present. It is as though she understood that to be seen was to be fixed, and she refused fixation. She preferred to exist in the margins, in the rustle of paper, the click of glass, the pause between breaths, and so the manor endures, not as a tomb, but as a threshold. Those who pass by on fog-laced mornings sometimes swear they hear a voice, not speaking but dictating, calm and precise, listing parts, noting conditions, affirming readiness. The words are never clear, but the tone is unmistakable. Professional, patient, and utterly certain of its purpose. For Eleanor Lyle did not believe death was an end, but a reassignment. And somewhere, in the silent chambers of that crumbling house, the work continues, not in blood, not in bone alone, but in the quiet, unbroken act of remembering how to be useful, on the rare nights when the moon aligns just so, casting long shadows through the broken windows. One might glimpse a reflection in the remaining shards of glass, not of oneself, but of a room filled with figures seated in perfect stillness, each holding an object that gleams faintly in the dark. And at the head of the table, a woman in black, her hands folded, her eyes closed, listening, not to the dead but for the next note in a symphony that has no end.